Maria. She had worked for many years at a local restaurant as a waitress, and I guess the term today, to be politically correct, would be a food server. She'd worked for the man who owned the restaurant all this time, and she was a great server in the job that she did. One evening, a couple came in for dinner, and it was her table, so she was to look after them for the evening. Now, I don't know if any of you have worked with the public, but sometimes there are customers that no matter what you do, you just could not or cannot please them. And she thought that the evening had gone okay until she saw this couple up talking to the owner of the restaurant, and she was wondering, they were having quite a long discussion. So she was wondering what it was about. Anyway, after they left, the owner of the restaurant called her aside and more or less chastised her that the service was not good, the people had complained. And in that moment, she kind of lost it. And I always tell people, never get angry when you're in a time of desolation, because you'll say and probably do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do. And that was the case here. She took her apron off, threw it on the table, and said, "I'm out of here, I'm finished, I'm done." And she left. But she carried something out with her that evening that she didn't intend to take with her, but she did. And that was the animosity and the ill will and the bad feelings of what had happened to her by this boss, who she considered not just a boss, but a friend, and why he didn't stick up for her and why it ended up the way it did. In fact, it changed her whole personality. Afterwards, with people, she was very short-tempered, and she just felt like somebody had done something really bad against her, more than probably just a couple of people that had made a complaint. But she was devastated, and it lasted and lasted and lasted, that she just could not seem to get over this. But life went on, and she did get another job. Actually, it was a better job. She was working for a large restaurant supply company, doing very well. So she was attending a trade show for the restaurant business, and it was being held at the top of a high building, in a ballroom at the top of the building, with a panoramic view of the city. And of course, you had to take an elevator to get up there. So she rode up in the elevator, and when the doors opened, guess who was standing in front of her at the elevator? Her old boss. Well, she just looked at him, and he looked at her, and then a smile came on his face, and he walked over, and he said, "I'm so happy to see you. How have you been? I haven't seen you for such a long time." And he gave her a big hug, and he said, "I hope things that are going well." And she said a few words and walked away and went and sat in a chair. And she said, "All this time, I was so angry with him. It verged on more than just animosity. It was almost a hatred for him." And she sat down and almost cried, and she said, "Why did I let this do this to me? Why did I not do something about this instead of letting this bore into my heart and my soul and to make my life almost," what she said, "a living hell?" So she got up and she walked back over to him. She saw him in the room, and she told him what happened. And he looked at her and he said, "Maria, I'm sorry. I had no idea that affected you that much. I knew that you left." And she said, "No, I'm sorry too." She said, "I never should have done that. I never should have made that terrible decision I made that day." And she was released at that moment. Everything that she had suffered for this amount of time had vanished, because of the forgiveness that she was able to give him, knowing now that all these years he had not known what had really occurred. So in this case, the lack of forgiveness had been a torture to her. It made her life miserable. So we must be able to find that forgiveness for all people. You see, if we can give personal forgiveness, that's the key to good relationships and to harmony. We must rise above what is often a feeling, as we hear in the gospel, the phrase, against you. That's a harsh thing to say, that somebody did something against me or I did something against somebody else. And it's the personal animosity that arises from all that is like it's a poison to the people involved and sometimes even to an entire community. When something happens and there's no forgiveness, there's no dialogue, there's just this innate anger. So the forgiven must be also able to forgive. I know that this can be a difficult thing. Sometimes it's very hard to ask for forgiveness, but I found in some situations in my own life that it's harder to even give forgiveness. When somebody asks for it and you're so still upset from somebody that did something against you that it's very hard to say you're forgiven. But that's something we have to reach down within ourselves, because it's Jesus that says we must forgive if we are to be forgiven by God. We hear that today in the gospel story. And in Matthew's gospel, we also hear that if you forgive men who trespass against you, then you will be forgiven when you transgress against others. So mercy is a characteristic of God and should be of us, his people. If we cannot show mercy, how can we expect to receive it? Now, we all make mistakes. That's what life is. We do make mistakes. We're not perfect people. My wife and I were talking the other day, and she said, wouldn't it be funny if when we're born, we had a little voucher in our hand that you could carry with you, and when you needed it, it said, good for one, do-over. Signed, God. But we know that's not the case. There's no do-overs. Life is what it is. And it's also like when you're in school and you get a pencil, a brand new pencil. It's a long pencil. By the time you're finished, a month or so, it's down to a nub. But did you ever notice that the eraser on the end is gone? And all you have is the metal ring. You try to erase something and you're just ripping the paper apart. Because pencils were made with an end on them to correct the mistakes that we make. So perhaps the vision of us coming into the world with a huge eraser on our head might have been too far-fetched, I guess, because we do make mistakes. And we do our best to erase them, not with an eraser, but by forgiveness. So we must be able to forgive not just once or twice, but again and again and again. And what did Jesus say to Peter? Peter thought he was being probably pretty smart when he said 7 times. In the old law, 3 times was usually what the law had said in those days, that you should forgive 3 times. But he thought, I'll double it and add 1. That should be enough. But what does the Lord say? No, 70 times. Meaning that we have to forgive again and again and again, because we continually have these times of making mistakes. So we must pray for the power to forgive. Father Eve Quoted St. Francis of Assisi last week, and in this new series of preaching that we're doing in these coming weeks. The theme is there. Last week was on debt. This week is on mercy and forgiveness, which is a way of repaying a debt, in a sense. So Father Eve talked about St. Francis of Assisi, and today I'm going to say a quote from St. Francis of Assisi. For it is in forgiving that we are healed. And there's another one that I have, it's hanging in my office. It's from St. Augustine. And he said, wrong is wrong if everyone is doing it. But right is right, even if no one is doing it. So think about those words. It's a play on words kind of, but it is so impactful when you read it a few times and think about it. So mercy and forgiveness should be at the heart of every Christian life as we encounter one another. In today's first reading, we hear that we often cherish wrath, that we feed our anger and refuse mercy and forgiveness to those who have done us wrong. That's true for a lot of people we encounter, but sometimes it's even more heartfelt for the ones we love when we felt that we've been wronged. And that's even more of a reason to forgive. The Our Father that's recited and prayed at every Mass clearly does tell us, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Powerful words that Jesus taught us. And Paul reminds us that we are the Lord's. We have all been purchased by the blood of Christ, shed for all of us on the cross. Forgiveness is the antidote against the anger and malice of the poison of sin. Forgiving from the heart, overlooking each other's faults, is doing what the Lord's kindness, the Lord's mercy, and compassion teaches all of us.